Hey there, I'm Kyle Merkel, pastor at Celebration Lutheran Church, and we welcome you to our Wednesday evening Lenten services where normally we hold an evening prayer at church, and we would be having this sermon series, The Love Languages of God. Fortunately, due to the pandemic of COVID-19, we're no longer gathering in worship, and as you can tell, I'm not at church because due to the governor's stay-at-home policy, I'm trying to do my best to live into that and do my part. So I'll be preaching today from my living room and using the help of this trusty ladder. It's a good sturdy ladder. Helped us do some work on our home. So it's good to be with you today. A little bit of a recap. We continue our sermon series called The Love Languages of God, where we've been using the New York Times bestseller, The 5 Love Languages of God, where Dr. Gary Chapman presents a simple truth that relationships grow. They grow better when we understand each other. And everyone gives and receives love differently, but with a little insight into these differences, well, we can be confidently equipped to communicate love and receive love well. Now, Chapman says there's 5 love languages: words of affirmation, acts of service, receiving gifts, quality time, and physical touch. Each person has a primary love language, which means that one of the 5 love languages speaks more deeply than the other 4 on an emotional and spiritual level. But this Lent, it's been my hope to use the love languages observed in human relationships as various aspects and mediums, as ways to discover and reflect divine love. Now, if people are indeed made in the image of God, and if people have 5 distinct love languages, then we would expect to find all those love languages expressed in the character and nature of God. Because God speaks every language, so it's not surprising to discover that God communicates fluently through each of the love languages, and therefore with each of us today. Now, last week we talked about gifts. This week's topic is acts of service. God expressed God's love for humankind by sending Jesus into the world, an act, who then in turn, Jesus expressed his love by a supreme act of service, giving his life for the world, giving his life for people and their sins. We can say that Jesus' entire life was an act of service, but the Gospels are full of examples. Jesus washing the feet of his disciples, Jesus cooking breakfast for the disciples, feeding 5,000. When we look at the miracles that he performed, we see that they were always ways of expressing his love for people. Healing the sick, giving the sight to the blind, calming the storm, casting out demons. Those were not only miracles and signs that identified Jesus with God, but they're also expressions of love. They're a language of love. Now, such acts of service, I believe, are reflected in Jesus' powerful statement as the Father has loved me, so I love you. So that love from Jesus comes from the love of God. Now, Jesus framed his own death as an act of service when he said, "My command is this, love each other as I have loved you." There's no greater love than this, to lay down one's life for one's friends. What a powerful statement from Jesus. But Jesus isn't the only one in scriptures. The Apostle Paul clearly understood the death of Christ as an expression of God's love. Paul's famous words to the church, written to the church in Rome. But God demonstrates his own love for us in this, that while we were still sinners, Christ died for us. Christ loved us. Paul was overwhelmed by the thought that Christ would die not for good people, but for all people, for sinners. And this week I couldn't help but think of a better example than Mother Teresa as the best modern day example of someone with the primary love language of acts of service in connection with their faith and with God. Because after 9 years of teaching at the only Catholic school in Calcutta for girls, most of whom came from upper wealthier families, well-to-do families, Mother Teresa, Sister Teresa, became aware of a different calling. She said that I had to leave the covenant and consecrate myself to the poor living among my community. And Mother Teresa started working with those she found first. Abandoned children in city parks. She began by teaching them basic habits of good hygiene, but she also helped them learn the alphabet. And there was no master blueprint for her work, but her goal was clear: to love and serve those in need, those around her, the poor, and also seeing Jesus in them. She found a woman dying on a sidewalk. She took the woman home with her shortly, and thereafter opened the home for the dying to provide a peaceful and dignified place for people to die. And later she found homeless children living on the streets who were children of those staying at the home for dying. So she opened a series of children's homes. And in a similar manner, she started opening homes for lepers, people living with AIDS and HIV, and single mothers. And she was awarded the Nobel Peace Prize in 1979, but she did not consider the cash award as personal property, but rather accepted it in the name of the poor and spent it all on them. So to view Mother Teresa simply sort of an out of this world example of an altruistic person is to miss the central message of her life. As she explained herself, whoever the poorest of the poor are, they are Christ for us. Christ under the veil of human suffering. She said that she was convinced that each time we offer help to the poor, well, we really offer that help to Christ. The central dimension of Mother Teresa's acts of service was spiritual, faithful in nature. For her, loving God meant serving people, meant acts of service. So Mother Teresa and Jesus and others have ultimately won our hearts with love, expressed through compassionate acts of service and love. And serving a God who speaks through acts of service is ample motivation for them, for us, to live that and speak that language of love, to serve one another. And I think this is a good love language to hold as we're in quarantine. I know it may be hard to see the future as we're currently in this. We don't know when things will return to normal, but when they do, I imagine that there will be ample opportunities to serve one another, especially those in need. And as Martin Luther famously said, God does not need your good works, but your neighbor does. Amen. God bless y'all.